It started off on Omegle. I'm an 18-year-old at the moment. Since I turned 13, I developed a habit of talking to strangers online. Every day after coming home from school, I used to talk to the numerous idiots, some decent people, some creeps, but nothing as bad as this. For some backstory, I generally followed a similar routine on most days. Monday to Thursdays, it was go to school, come home, and then just watch a few episodes of Friends or The Middle. On Fridays, I usually went out and chilled with my friends. Saturdays was just the day I went to the town centre where there were usually a lot of shops, cinemas and whatnot. I preferred to go out by myself on this day, though occasionally I went with friends. I just got home, jumped onto the computer, switching on my usual choice of music and just unwinding from a rough day at school. I watched some YouTube videos, a few episodes of Friends, and then after eating proceeded to go onto Omegle. After a few strangers and perverts, I came across a decent guy called Chris. Now Chris and I exchanged messages for about 40 to 50 minutes when I just told him a little bit about myself. Just some general information, nothing specific to be honest. Things I like to do, and that was basically it. He told me he was 18 years old and working at an ICT company as an apprentice. He seemed to have many of the same interests I did, which was a little cool because it gave us a lot to talk about. I casually told him that my web browser was acting up, to which he said, "Hey, I'm great with computers. My job involves working with them. You should totally download this application and I'll see what I can do for you if you want." Me being as innocent as I was, I agreed. The application he told me to download was either TeamViewer or Splashtop Streamer. The reason I wasn't hesitant was because there wasn't anything on my computer, no personal details, just some schoolwork and video games. It was pretty neat that he could just control my computer. I messaged Chris saying that I'm popping downstairs for 5 minutes and that I'd be right back. I came back in within 3 minutes, seeing him erasing my web history. This didn't seem sketchy as I had a problem with my browser. I asked him after he was done what he was doing and he said that the problem is all fixed, and it was. I thanked him and we spoke for about 20 minutes more. We planned to speak the following evening with some tags so the system matched us together. The next evening, we proceeded to speak. This time, however, he started acting up, asking why I was late. I said I was going to come online at 8 PM. I don't remember the exact time, but I know for a fact that I wasn't even that late, max 15 minutes. I told him not to speak to me like that, and asked why he was acting like a fucking idiot for. He went on saying, "Sorry, honey, I hope you can forgive me. I love you." Now, I'm not into guys, and these messages were freaking me out. I told him to stop, and he just sent me a few smiley faces. He then went on to say, "I know where you live. I know what school you go to," and things of that sort. Our town is a small one, and there wasn't any way that he could have guessed that. Things were uneventful for the next few days, until the following Saturday when I went shopping with some friends. We all grabbed something to eat, and then just sort of chilled on one of the benches chatting. A man then popped next to us, asking if he could sit down. I was a little apprehensive, but my friend said that they were public seats and we shouldn't stop him. He was standing on my friend's side, but when we allowed him to sit, he shifted right next to me. He just sat still there, not moving, not saying a word, but just looking straight ahead. He then turned toward me and smiled. I tried to get up, but he grabbed my shoulder, to which my friend started shouting. He then started shouting himself, directly in my ear, and casually walked away. My friends walked me home that night, but it got worse then. Someone started posting blank letters through the letterbox. We started getting random bangs on the door, and when we went out, there wasn't anyone there. When I passed my driving test, I got a letter congratulating me. It was typed up. We still get the letters, just not as frequently, and the police seem not to have believed a single word, but it's supposedly being investigated. When I was young, I lived in quite a small town in Queensland, Australia. The whole town was surrounded by bush in every direction for hundreds of kilometres, and we had so much room to play. This particular story is about the first time we got drunk. In the winter, the level of the water would drop significantly, enough for us to camp in the riverbed. My best mate's parents owned a pub at the time, so we were in charge of getting drinks for a little camping trip we had planned, so we could finally pop our drunk cherry. The place we had in mind was out near an old indigenous settlement, so we made our way down into the riverbank, which was low on the side we came in on and really high on the other side. You couldn't see on the other side through all of the trees on the top, and it was kind of unnerving knowing someone could be there, watching, and you wouldn't even know. There are about 7 of us kids in the camp, and our parents have no idea where we are or what we're doing. We lied and said that we were staying at a friend's place. We set up our camp and built a shelter for all of us to sleep under. We are all set up and start drinking as the sun is setting. Soon it's dark and we're in full swing of mixing drinks and singing songs and throwing stuff in the water, and generally making a whole heap of noise. As we're starting to wind down, one of my friends says that he saw something move at the top of the riverbank on the steep side. We all say that he's full of shit and should calm down, but he is adamant that there is someone up there, so we all start calling out,
"Come out, you pussy!"
and other such things, being brave well beyond our years. To our surprise, a bearded man wearing straggly clothes and no shoes came out of the tree line, stands on the edge of the bank and just stares at us. We all go silent, waiting for him to do something, but for about 5 minutes, he just stands there, and then he retreats back into the tree line. We all talk amongst ourselves and get a bit nervous, but we soon forget it. About an hour later, the guy is back, but he isn't on the bank anymore. He is coming out of the shadows from the other side of the bank and entering our camp. He comes over and stands next to the fire, just joins our group of 12-year-old kids and stands there. We're all officially a bit scared and don't really know what to do, so we just sit there in silence. Eventually one of my friends gets up the courage to speak to him. "G'day mate, how are you? Are you okay?" The guy just stares at my friend and then starts staring at each of us in turn for a little bit. My friend tries again. "Hey, are you okay? What's your name?" The man snaps his head back at my friend and stares at him, wide-eyed for at least 2 minutes before answering. Without blinking, he says in a raspy whisper, "That's none of your fucking business." And then he hisses like a cat. Then this guy just jumps back screaming and staring at the fire like it had just appeared, and runs off up the steep bank in record time. It was impossible to get up this thing, so we all stand there, speechless. We decided that it's best if we just stoke the fire up because it's about a 19-kilometer walk in the pitch black back to town, and we weren't confident on that. So stoke the fire we did. We sat up for as long as we could keep watchful, not really talking. We all eventually dozed off, one by one. When we woke up in the morning, everything was gone. All of our alcohol, all of our bags, our shoes, and all of our blankets. I mean, everything. The creepy thing was that none of us awoke as someone robbed us blind. There was not one single footprint. We were sleeping in wettish sand, so there would have been footprints everywhere, but there were none. Honestly, it looked like we hadn't even been there. Needless to say, we bailed and ran most of the way back to town. Our feet were all cut up and messy by the time we got back. We never told our parents about our camping trip, and I think that we never will. One night I had fallen asleep on my back, which is very unusual for me. I tended to sleep on my side, but for whatever reason this time I didn't. While I slept, I kept my small box fan on because it was a warm night and I hate the feeling of overheating. I began to dream in my dream that I was preparing dinner for my family in the kitchen. One of my sisters, who was pregnant at the time, was standing outside of my bedroom. She opened the door and outran my black cat, which must have surprised her because she screamed. I began to laugh in my kitchen and said, "It's just Binks." I said this as I walked from the kitchen to the hallway to see if my sister was okay, and that's when my dream began to get weird. My sister was staring into my room, which was much darker than it should have been. "No," she whispered, "there's something in your room." I wiped my hands on a small towel and walked over to my room. "There's something in your room," she repeated as I stared along with her. As I looked into the pitch-black room, everything seemed to get foggy. "There's something in your room," she said again as I kept on looking. Toward the back of my room, I started to see something. A glowing pair of red eyes in the dark. As the eyes became clearer, I began to remember something, or feel like I was remembering something. It was like my brain was trying to bring up something that was forgotten a long time ago. My sister's voice kept saying, "There's something in your room," over and over again. Each time she repeated it, she said it faster and faster. Her voice faded and became the swooshing sound of the blades of my fan. The small fan was going way faster than its highest setting. It's going so quick that it's shaking and thudding against the wood of my nightstand. I opened my eyes, and that's when I felt a hand cover my mouth and something pin me down on my bed. It felt like someone was holding every one of my limbs to stop me from moving. A loud ringing began to go off in my ear and I could hear my heart beating rapidly in my chest. I started to fight and move my head and try to break free from whatever was holding me down. It was getting hard for me to breathe, and after what seemed like forever, I managed to escape the hand in my mouth and let out a yell. I fell out of bed and landed on the floor. I stumbled to my feet and ran out of the room. As I made my way through the house, I turned on every light, as if this would help in some way. In the back of my mind, I thought it was just sleep paralysis. To make myself a little better, I walked back to my room, turned on the light and began to speak. I said, "If there are any spirits in this room who wish to do me harm, you're not welcome here." I repeated that over and over before I sat back down on my bed. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. One of the reasons why is because I could feel something staring at me through my window. I felt like if I turned around to look out my window, I would see whatever it was that was holding me down. A day had passed when my neighbor came knocking on my door. She told my mum that she'd been trying to call because one of her security cameras showed what looked like a man standing outside my bedroom window at 3 a.m. When I was told about it, my sister's words started to repeat themselves in my head. "There's something in my room." The Indigenous people of Australia have up to 75 different dialects depending on the region where they come from, so the name of this being could be called something entirely different in other dialects, but my local tribe called it the Kardashi man. Growing up in an outback town, you get a lot of freedom you take for granted, but that freedom could also get you into trouble. Big trouble. This occurred when I was about 11 years old in my hometown. My Aboriginal friend and I were walking around town bored out of our brains during the school holidays, so we decided to go fishing in a secret spot down by the old Aboriginal encampment, which was about 15 kilometers out of town. We headed around to the butchery to pick up some meat for Yabbies, to his house for rods and traps, and then my house for food, drinks and a shovel. We planned to dig for worms out by the river. We got all the necessary supplies and headed out along the side of the highway. We were walking and talking and stuffing around when we finally got there. We headed down the sand road and came across the fence that blocked the sacred land. There was a statue of some sort on the boundary. My mate stopped and said a few words. He always said that his dad told him to do it, otherwise the bad spirits could see us. I told him that was silly and skipped it. We go back down the camp and walk on another kilometer or so and find our spot. All the noises of the bush were there. There was a nice breeze blowing through the old ghost gums. We saw the fish jumping and knew that we were in for a good day. We start digging around for worms and come up with a few good big ones and get to fishing. The day gets on and it turns out that we are terrible fishermen with rods, so we abandon them and get in the water to catch with our hands. Turns out I'm also terrible at that, but my mate ends up catching a decent sized yellowbelly, so we keep it for eating and showing off. We hadn't kept an eye on the time, and before we knew it, the sun had set. My friend starts getting really nervous, saying that it's time to get out of there, we really need to leave. I ask why, and he says that it's really unsafe to be there after dark. I laugh, and at that exact moment, there is a huge splash in the water behind us. We both shit a little bit, but with our child bravery, we check it out and can't see a thing, just ripples on top of the water. We dismiss it as a big fish and start to pack up our stuff to leave. By the time we start our march back, it's pitch black. We can barely see our hands in front of us and forget to pack a torch, so we kind of fumble our way through the bush until our eyes adjusted. We were walking for about 20 minutes when we stop. We can hear heavy footsteps off to our left about 15 meters away. We strain our hearing and the footsteps stop. We then realize that the bush is silent, no wind. Nothing. Our eyes have adjusted to the dark so we can kind of see where we're going, We realized that we have overshot the road by about half a kilometer, and whatever was making the footsteps was between us and the road. So we decided to push on and come out along the highway further up the road. That was a mistake. The footsteps kept persisting, sometimes closer and sometimes further away. I swear at times that I could hear low mumbling. I kept telling this to my friend, but he told me to shut up and don't look back. It can't see us. So I push on, my feeling getting more and more uneasy. The next second, we hear a loud crash come from our left on the small animal trail we were on, and my mate grabs me and pulls me off into the scrub and tells me to lay down. As we're laying there, we see a silhouette loom up to the path. It kind of has the outline of feathers on it, and is godly tall and humanoid, but sickly thin. It's going from tree to tree, not very far from us, and is looking all around, snapping its head and making a low mumbling sound as it moves. It was looking for us. It keeps moving around where we were standing, and suddenly stops and stoops, looking back down the path where we hear what could have been a kangaroo jump off into the bush. The being lets out an unearthly scream that hurts our ears and shoots off down the path faster than anything I've ever seen. I looked to my mate and whispered to him if he had just seen what I had, but when I looked, he had his head in his hands the whole time. He answered, "We're not allowed to look." His cheeks were all tear-stained, then he whispered, "I told you he would see you." We waited for what felt like 2 hours, and bailed out of the bushes and ran the remaining distance to town, losing our fish along the way and some of our stuff. We finally made it, and every time I tried to bring it up with him, he told me to shut my mouth or he would come back. So eventually, I just stopped trying. I've never been able to sleep right since. I went out pigging with one of my best mates all the time, but this one time, the dogs lose their shit and go to jump off the back, so we stop and let them loose, and they shoot off like they're on the trail of something beside a really tall dam bank, so we think we're onto some pigs. We were standing there and could hear their bells off in the distance getting further away, and then nothing. The bush was silent and we started to get a bit unnerved. We felt okay because we were holding loaded guns, but it was still an uneasy feeling. We stood listening for about 10 to 15 minutes and could not hear a thing. It was almost suffocating, so my mate started calling his dogs in. He's calling for a good 15 minutes and we still hear nothing, so he says fuck this, we're going to look for them. As he turned to the car, we hear the bells come from behind us in the tree line, which we thought was weird because it was the opposite direction to which the dogs had left. So we turn around listening, and my mate starts calling out to them to come. And from behind us comes the dogs, without their bells. Needless to say, we both shat bricks and throw them on the car and bail to the other side of the place. The whole time the bells were jingling like something had them on. Weird thing was, we were a good 400 kilometers from the closest civilization, so we shit absolute bricks and were uneasy for the rest of the night. I'm really curious if anyone else experienced anything like this. I work as a doorman and have done so for about 5.5 years. Money's not exactly amazing, but it's my job. It would be great if I could get a full-time job to pay my child maintenance, but unfortunately, in the area I stay in Scotland, they ain't exactly handing out jobs, so you can imagine that times are a bit tough. However, there was a time where I loved the job. It was great at the start, up until about 2 years ago. Let me take you back a couple of weeks before the incident. Okay, so it's a freezing cold January, still snowing, and you can see your breath when you're breathing, your hands are cold and you're all stiff, and you're outside for 12-hour shifts, checking people's IDs and putting up with a lot of grief when rejecting drunk people. So I remember this one time, I had met a guy at my regular venue, and I saw him all the time, every weekend in fact, but we had never spoken, apart from the odd hi mate, when walking past one another. So I was standing at the front door one night, freezing my balls off when he came out and approached me and started talking over a cigarette. It turned out he was a good lad and we had a great laugh. This happened for about 2 weeks, but at the same time, I had my eye on my now girlfriend. She kept looking across the bar and I would catch small glimpses of her doing it, and I knew that we both liked each other. So she came out and started talking to me. This began happening every weekend and during the week even. And so, it wasn't long before we began seeing each other, and I couldn't be more happy. I had been seeing Amy for a good 3 weeks and hadn't heard anything from the guy since me and my missus had got together. So one weekend, I came in to look for him, and he was nowhere to be seen. I went to see the management and asked them if they had seen him, and they hadn't seen him in weeks. So, the night in question, I was standing at the door and the snow had stopped and it was about midnight and I hear the door behind me open as though someone was leaving. So I turned and went to say thank you guys and saw him standing there with a weird smile on his face. I said to him, "Where have you been hiding?" But he was very blunt with his response and it didn't quite sit right with me. Anyways, he had a cigarette and nothing more was said. The missus was in the house on this night, so he finished his cigarette and walked back inside and out the back door. Once it hit 1 o'clock, I did the usual, "Right guys, finish your drinks and head to the exit please." Once everyone had left, I locked up the pub, said goodbye to the manager and bar staff, and put my headphones in and proceeded to walk home. The quickest way to get home was along the side of a Tesco store, and it wasn't very well lit. So I'm walking down there and singing to myself, as you do when you're all alone. Not really paying attention to where I was going, and I banged into someone, took my headphones out to apologize. And it was him. I said, "Sorry mate, see you next weekend," and proceeded to walk away and put my headphones back in, and must have done about 30 yards when I felt this searing pain in the right side of my neck, my side, and my leg. I fell to the floor and could feel blood gushing from these wounds. I remember turning over and seeing him standing there with a steak knife, just smiling. After this he walked away and I managed to get my phone out, but couldn't unlock the phone though with the fingerprint scanner or the password because I had blood all over my hands. So I typed with my nose on the screen and called an ambulance, applying pressure to my neck, as that's where I was most worried about. They were really quick in getting there and I was on my way to the hospital in no time. So I'm on my way to the hospital and my vision keeps blurring. I'm having problems breathing and my leg kept twitching. The doctors worked on me, and I can't say I remember much as I was asleep. I remember waking up the next day with a massive headache and my missus at the side of my bed. She grabbed my hand and started crying. My parents and my sisters were in the diner and came about 10 minutes later. I had to stay in the hospital for 4 to 5 days, and after the 4th, I signed myself out and headed home. I remember getting to my garden gate, putting my hand on the gate and looking up the street where it happened. I walked inside and laid down with painkillers and a cup of tea. The days passed and I started to feel a bit better and decided to go to work. And safe to say, me and the missus had a major falling out over this. But as I said earlier, money's not great. So against her wishes, I went the long way around to work. I did my shift and no sign of the guy. This happened for about 2 weeks and then when I came home one night, my missus said that strange things had been happening and she believed that someone was watching the house. I told her to stop being silly. There was nothing to worry about. The next night we're lying in bed after making love, and she's lying on my arm, head against my chest, sleeping, and I'm just about to drift off, when the whole bedroom window caves in. My missus is screaming, and I bounced up out of the bed and put my slippers on and ran down the stairs to check the front garden. When I was about to unlock the door, there was another smash from the kitchen window, so I ran to the back door, unlocked it, and looked with the light from my phone. But there was no one there. I locked the doors and went to attend to my missus. The next day, I popped out to the shop for some bread and milk, and the missus was waiting on the guys coming out to look and fix the windows. When I got home, my missus gave me a letter, so I opened it, and it read, "How dare you leave me in my time of need?" I showed her the letter, and she took it pretty badly and packed her stuff and went to her mother's. That night I'm lying in bed, just about to doze off, and I hear whistling coming from outside. It sounded creepy, so I got up and looked outside my newly fitted window, and it was some guy walking past with his hood up. Just walking past, but he got centered with the window and stopped, still whistling that creepy tune, and then he turned his head quicker than a flash up to the bedroom window to see me standing there. I'm not afraid of much, but this was crazy. I was really scared and fell back on the floor, and then I heard the front door. There were some bangs, and then that same whistling tune. I could hear the door handle being tried. and then it went silent. I waited for about 5 minutes and checked around the house, front and back gardens, and it was all clear. The next couple of nights, everything was fine. I got good sleep and I went back to work with the manager and asked what happened. I told her, as she wasn't in when I came back after the injury. About halfway through the shift, I saw a guy watching the football, back face to me, same snot green coloured jacket and brown khaki pants, and I whispered to the manager that I think that's him. She replied and told me that he has a split personality and has hurt people before, but got away with it because apparently it wasn't him committing the crimes. As the football was at half time and I had been talking to the bar staff, he came up and was all nice. He said to me, "Hey dude, long time no see, how you been?" I looked at his face and remembered that image of him standing over me with the steak knife. I don't know why, but my reply was, "Yeah, fine mate, how about yourself?" He said, "Yeah, I'm fine, can I buy a pint?" The whole time, I was thinking to myself that this guy wanted to end my life and now wants to have a pint with me. I said, "Sorry, I can't do it because I'm working." He said, "Oh well," and had to go to the toilet. I was speaking to the manager, seeing if she thought it was put on or if he genuinely did have a split personality. She was just about to finish her sentence when the toilet door swung open and he came out with a terrible facial demeanor. He raised his arms, storming towards me with the same knife, but this time I got the better. As he swung at me, I broke his elbow and made him drop the knife and restrained him on the floor and called the police. They came and took him away. I haven't seen or heard anything about him for over 2 years now. Last thing I did hear was that he was put into a mental hospital. Me and my missus got back together again and have since moved house and had a beautiful baby girl, and are expecting our second anytime soon. I suppose that the main point of this story is, don't judge a book by its cover. I thought this guy was the nicest man alive, but he tried to take my life, and then offered me a pint and tried to take my life a second time. Be careful who you let into your life. I know it's a lot harder for me to trust new people nowadays. A few years ago, my brother-in-law bought another apartment complex in Florida. He owns a few apartment complexes in West Palm Beach, Miami, etc. So when he told me that he bought another one and wanted me to manage it, I figured, why the hell not? I had just graduated college with my degree and planned to go get my master's, so I figured I could manage his place and do graduate school. When he booked my flight to Orlando, I was stoked. I love Disney, and I dreamed about buying a year pass and checking out all the neat parks. When we got there, we drove out to Orlando and I had a bad feeling. He bought the apartments in a town called Leesburg. It's only an hour or so from Orlando. It's if a biker town in a retirement community had a baby. I was a little disappointed that I was an hour from Orlando with its nightlife, clubs and whatnot. I made it to work though, and soon settled into life, managing a small apartment complex. I had my one-bedroom apartment in the corner, and then there were 10 other tenants. Most were older folks, snowbirds and retirees that spent their days golfing and swimming in the pool we had. There were 2 military families, one with small kids. And then there was Andy. Andy was an enormous man. I'm a pretty big guy, 6'4", 250 pounds. But he was at least 6'6" and 400 plus pounds. He walked with a cane and had long black hair he had put in a ponytail. He worked from home, or so he said, but rumor was that he was on a disability after a horrible work accident. I really didn't care. He paid his rent on time, he was quiet and he kept to himself. I was only in his place once when his AC cut out, and to my surprise, it was pretty neat. There were no food containers or pizza boxes, beer cans, etc. that I expected a big guy like him to have laying around. Things in our complex went pretty good for the next year, until one night in November. It was raining, like it always does in Florida, and it was about midnight when someone rang on my doorbell. I looked out and saw one of my tenants, Joseph. Joe was one of my retirees who retired to Florida to, in his words, play golf and drink beer. Normally he was all smiles and jokes, but that night his face was pale and he looked frightened. I hate to bother you, Sam, but something ain't right with Andy. I put my jacket on and followed him to his apartment since Andy was his neighbor. He put his finger to his lip and motioned for me to listen. I put my ear up to the door and heard Andy fighting with someone. It sounded like whomever he was fighting with was throwing things. I was taken aback as he never had a guest over, ever, in the year he had lived there. So I knocked and heard him stomp over to the door and open it. He looked, well, normally he was very well dressed, put together. And like I said, he wasn't a messy guy. But he answered in a shirt that had grease stains, his hair was limp and greasy, and he smelt like BO. I peered in behind him and saw that his place was a disaster. I asked if everything was okay. He was irritated and told me that it was, and pretty much shut the door in my face. I sent Joe back into his place and told him to let me know if he heard anything else, and went to bed. The next morning, I decided to pay Andy a visit to see if he was okay, and so I went by his place and knocked. There was no answer, so I decided to try back later. I got busy doing other things, and then forgot all about it. December rolls around, and I'm starting to get the monthly rent checks. None from Andy. That got me a bit worried. He was always on time with his checks. So I knocked on his door, and nothing. I knocked again, and I heard grunting and moaning. Now, I should have called the police first, but I didn't. I opened the door with my keyring, and was hit with the foulest smell ever. It smelled like piss, shit, vomit, and BO, all rolled into one nasty smell. The walls were streaked with what I assume was shit, and the place was trashed. I start calling for Andy while dialing 911, and I hear the moaning from the back bedroom. I can never unsee what I saw, and to this day, I get flashbacks. Andy was naked and laying on the floor of his room on some dirty clothes. He was covered in his own shit and piss, and there were piles of vomit on the carpet. That was bad, but what was the clincher was that he was covered in bites, human bites, all over his arms, legs, and they were starting to smell with infection. He was also bleeding from his rectum. I wondered who attacked him. Was it the woman we heard him fighting with? I didn't get my answer until a few days after. He had been rushed to the hospital and was fighting for his life in the ICU. The doctors talked to his sister, who turned out to be his medical guardian, and things slowly came into place. Turns out, Andy did that to himself. He suffered from multiple mental disorders. He stopped taking his meds in the month before November. There was no other person that night that he was arguing with himself. Those bites he inflicted himself, the bleeding in his rectum from inserting a foreign object in there, and doing so much damage it ruptured his internal organs. He ended up pulling through and went home to live with his sister. I had the task of cleaning his apartment, and what I found while cleaning pretty much freaks me out as much as finding him. He had a shoebox full of cutouts from magazines, old family photos, and even photos he obviously took of the residents in the apartments, including myself. All of the eyes were burnt out with cigarettes, and on some of them, X's were put over the mouths. I'm not sure if that was part of his mental decline, or if he was always that creepy, and I just never noticed it. This took place about 5 years ago when I was 23 years old. At this time in my life, I was pretty out of control. I didn't know I was bipolar, so I put myself in situations that were not the best. I had a boyfriend of 3 years that was off and on every other week. He was straight edge and pretty boring. Whenever I wanted to go out, it was always a fight. He would cry because I would go out to the bar, and then by the next week, we would be back together. One night I was leaving the salon, I'm a hairdresser, and decided I wanted to go out. It was a long week and I needed to blow off some steam, so I called up my best friend Nicole and told her to meet me at the bar near my house. This bar was known for its really strong drinks and was full of townies. We never went there before, but I figured why not try it out because of how close it was. So that night I got in a huge fight with my boyfriend and we broke up again. This time was different though. I had enough of the back and forth and really decided to move on. When Nicole and I got to the bar, we looked around. There were a lot of people in groups and they definitely noticed us. We didn't care and ended up getting pretty messed up. There was a deck where everyone smoked on, so we decided to go out there and try to meet people. I remember the moment I saw him. He was coming up the stairs and I instantly was attracted to him. It was almost like my breath was taken away as soon as we locked eyes. There was something different about him, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I needed to get to know him, so I introduced myself, and the rest was history. At the end of the night, Matt asked me and Nicole if we wanted to come over. He had a friend with him, so I figured we could keep partying. Also, his house was only a mile up the road. We hit it off really fast. I started going to his house after that night, almost every day. Before I knew it, I was practically moved in. He lived in an in-law style apartment with his grandparents on the top floor. They were fine with me just moving in, and that's when things started to turn. It was slow, but before I knew it, he was telling me what to do and what to wear. One day after work he freaked out on me for coming home late and ended up calling me just some fat bitch. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I leave? I'm not sure, but between all of the verbal abuse that started, I went from skinny to unhealthy looking. After about 4 months of verbal abuse, I decided to pack my things and move back home. Matt walked in the door as soon as I had my bags packed and freaked out. He said if I left him, he would kill himself. I thought he was joking, so I continued to get my stuff together. This is when he went into the kitchen and took a knife out. He started to cut himself right in front of me. He was screaming, "I dare you to leave." I was scared and not sure what the hell to do. His grandmother even came down to try and calm him. I think she knew that there was something wrong with him, but continued to deny it. I found this so bizarre, but I stayed. I think Matt realized I couldn't take it anymore, so one day, after work, he bought me a cat. I think he thought if he bought me an animal, because I loved animals, I wouldn't leave. Well, the week after he bought the cat, I was stuck at the salon late, doing hair. My phone had missed 50 calls and frantic texts. When I got home, I saw poop all over the bed. The cat was nowhere to be found, and Matt was in the shower freaking out and talking to himself. I asked him what the hell was going on. He said the cat pooped on my bed, and he looked it in my dresser. I was so freaked out and afraid, I didn't know what to do. I opened the dresser and the cat was covered in piss and poop. The once friendly cat was shaking and scared. I knew something happened in my gut. I knew he did something to that cat. This cat was well behaved and the mess on the bed looked like something struggled, not just an accident. After that point, the cat would not go near him and run if he came close to him. I decided that night I had to leave. I was scared, but we had a trip to go to the lake to see my grandfather that weekend. I really needed to go on the trip because he had cancer, and this would probably be the last summer that I saw him. I decided after the trip that I would pack up and that would be the end of it. I even made sure that my mum knew that I was coming back home. I knew Matt could tell that something was wrong because the whole ride up, it felt tense and uneasy. When we got to the lake, he freaked out because it was in the middle of nowhere. I told him there was a town nearby that had bars and a beach. We decided to go there for our first night. Up to this point, Matt never drank in front of me, probably because of the issues he tried to hide. But that night, he ended up getting hammered. I remember sitting on the beach, and he said,
"Do you know what happened to my ex-girlfriend's cat when she dumped me? I killed it and left it in a trash bag."
Then he said his grandparents knew because you can tell when a dead body is in a bag. At this point, I was legit freaking out. It was now confirmed that he was a sociopath, and I'm in the middle of nowhere with him. I tried not to overreact, but I wanted to get back to my grandfather's house, and fast. We got in the car and I started to drive towards the cabin. Matt grabbed the wheel and said, "I know you're going to dump me, you bitch." As he said this, he jerked the wheel so hard the car went out of control. I hit an old rock fence and my tire went flat. I went out to see the damage and Matt got out of the car as well. He proceeded to tell me if he killed me, no one would hear me scream. I was scared and trying to back away from him. He then lunged at me and started to punch my face. He kept hitting and kicking me until I fell in the street. I screamed help as loud as I could. I knew that he was going to try and kill me. Thank God that there was a motel up the road and someone yelled out that they were coming and to hold on. This spooked Matt, so he took off into the dark, dense woods. I was taken to the hospital that night with a broken nose and leg, plus a concussion. Matt was found by police dogs hiding deep in the woods. After I was well enough to get out of the hospital, I pressed charges. I had to leave my family's house because he continued to stalk me and got arrested. He would leave letters on my door saying that it wasn't over and he wanted to marry me. I had to leave my job because he would call and harass me. Everyone I worked with was freaked out, so I decided to quit. Every time there was contact, he would go to jail, to the point where, over a span of 6 months, he went to jail 5 times. Eventually, our trial came up. He knew he was guilty and my lawyer said that he was definitely going to do a lot of time. He also would need to pay all of my medical expenses. When it was time for court, he never showed up. Everyone in my family was confused, till my lawyer said that we'll not be having a trial today. I guess the night before court, Matt freaked out and decided to kill himself. I'm still not sure how, nor do I care. I guess he couldn't face jail or seeing me again. I remember he always said that jail scared him the most. It's sad, but I felt relieved in a weird way. I'm glad that he can't hurt anyone or anything ever again. I grew up on an island in Alaska, and I lived on the same property since birth to high school graduation. Our house was 2 stories, and the downstairs had a bathroom, furnace room, storage room, entryway, and rec room. One of the walls had some plywood pieces up, so we could feed extension cords through it to our crawl space. We had a C-shaped driveway that you would enter from one side and then park in the carport and then just drive forward to the exit. The crawl space consisted of 2 big water tanks because we caught our own rainwater. We also used this area for storage. The space was 10 by 15, but only 3 feet high. You had to lift a cover up to get into the water tanks. You could only enter the crawl space from one side of the house. It was a 2x2 door that we kept a master lock on, but never actually locked it. Our dog Brewster's area was on this side of the house as well. He had a big fenced area, his own stairway and porch which was half covered, and he had a doghouse. Brewster was a chocolate lab mix who weighed 130 pounds. He was a fantastic dog who only barked when necessary. During the summer, we had black bears in our yard most nights, and Brewster would give a quick bark to them to get on their way. There are 4 of us in my family, my parents, myself, and my older brother who is 2 years older and has Down syndrome. My brother was in special education at school, and there were other kids who would come into the same room, but just once in a while throughout the day, because they had a smaller disability and were able to keep up in some of the general classes. But some of the kids had discipline problems or mental illness. My brother was loved by the kids in the school and everyone knew him. One day a native kid that was about 15 came to our door and wanted to play with Travis. We thought it was odd because Travis was a moderate Downs and he didn't really like playing with other kids. He liked watching kids play. My mum asked the kid what his name was and he said his name was Mark and he knew Travis from junior high the year prior, because he would go into Travis's class sometimes for help with his schoolwork. I remember him staring at me a little too much, and he didn't seem like someone who was mentally challenged. My mum let him in, but kept a watchful eye on them. Travis didn't seem like he wanted him there. My mum told Mark that we were having dinner soon and told him that it was time for him to go. My mum found out that he had moved into the area where we lived, but it was still a little ways away. He had been in and out of foster care most of his life. His parents were abusive addicts. I think he came over another time, and my mum felt bad for him, but she felt something was off. She felt like he was coming over because of me. My mum politely told him that Travis didn't really like having visitors and he seemed okay with that and never came over again. My parents went to a church service on Wednesday evenings and would be gone for a couple of hours. I would stay home with Travis during this time. At the time, I was 11 and he was 13. I started helping out in the church nursery when I was 9, and when I turned 11, my best friends and I took a babysitting course which included CPR and first aid. We would babysit together, and at age 12, started babysitting on our own. My mum was a homemaker and was always home except for Wednesday church service time. My parents didn't drink, do drugs or smoke. I can only remember my parents going out a few times when we needed a babysitter. I would leave the downstairs door unlocked for my parents when they were only going to be gone for a couple of hours. I was expecting them home in a half hour and was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open, and I thought I must have not heard the car pull up, and Travis was up past his bedtime, so I quietly tell Travis to go to his bedroom and get into bed. I start walking through the kitchen to the top of the stairs and I call out, "Mum? Dad?" And I hear the footsteps stop and I'm looking down the stairs and I can see men's work boots and jeans. This isn't my parents. The way the stairs were set up, you could only see the bottom half of someone without descending the stairs. I am scared to death and I run to Travis, who is going down the hall, and I grab him and drag him to my parents' bedroom because it's the only room that locks, has a phone and rifles. Down's kids are very stubborn, so my brother just wants to go to his room, but I get him to sit down on the bed. I am trying to keep him in the room while I'm grabbing a gun and trying to call my neighbor. I can hear him walking around downstairs still. My neighbor answers her phone immediately, and I whisper that someone is in my house and I'm scared. She told me to come out onto the front porch and she'd be there. I get the courage and run to the door and get outside. Thankfully, she's in our driveway and has her hound dog with her. She lets me know that she's going to enter the house through the downstairs. She disappears from sight but comes back quickly and tells me that the door is locked, so she makes her way up the stairs. She gets to the top when we hear the downstairs door open and the crunch of gravel as the intruder is running off. She lets go of her dog's leash and the dog chased the person into the woods. The dog came back 10 minutes later and our neighbor sat with us until my parents got home. The police were never called because I think my parents assumed that it was a neighbor boy screwing with me. We lived in a safe place where you just had to worry about bears and the occasional wolf. A week after this incident, our dog would bark 15 minutes after we went to bed, every night. We would look out the windows and we never saw anything. We figured it was bears because it was springtime and Brewster was probably just getting used to them again. A couple of months pass and the barking is still happening. I had my best friend stay the night and we would always stay in the downstairs part so we could be louder and stay up late. Kate had a brother that was 17 years old and we asked if he'd bring us some booze. I know we were young, but that was the normal thing for our town. Kids started drinking, smoking and having sex in middle school because of boredom, I think. We got 13 feet of rain, so we would be inside a lot. It was a little after midnight and her brother never showed up, and Brewster never barked that night either. We were sitting on the stairs braiding each other's hair and we both got a feeling like someone was looking at us. And we looked over and there was a guy staring into the window. We ran up the stairs in a panic. We thought maybe it was her brother, but he wouldn't have come to the window and spied on us, and the face seemed too dark to be his. But we had the lights on in the downstairs part. There were no lights by that window outside, so it was hard to tell who it was. We didn't wake up my parents, just in case it was her brother. We waited 30 minutes and went back down to grab our stuff and went to sleep in my bedroom for the night. The next day we talked to her brother, and it wasn't him. And that night, Brewster was back to barking again. 2 more months go by, and I had gone to bed and heard Brewster bark, and I looked out my window, and as usual, didn't see anything. I had just dozed back off and I woke up to Brewster barking frantically. I look out my window and I see a guy running out of our driveway. I thought about waking up my parents, but we had a trail on the side of our house that kids used to get to the road behind us with. The neighborhood was on the side of a mountain, so all the kids used trails to go straight through to another road instead of using the main roads. I had never seen someone come out of the part of the driveway because the trail was on the south side of the house, along with the crawl space in Brewster's area. My room was the only room on the north side. I decided to go back to sleep and I was tossing and turning. 15 minutes go by and I smell smoke. I go to the hall and the smell is a lot stronger, and it's starting to get hazy in Travis's room, which was directly across from mine. I scream, "Fire! Fire! Wake up everyone!" My parents are up, and Travis doesn't want to get out of bed, but thank God for the strength of adrenaline. We get outside and flames are pouring out of the crawl space. We get Brewster out of his enclosure and the neighbors all come out to help us. The firemen were there rather quickly, but the fire had destroyed the crawl space and my parents' and Travis's bedrooms because they were directly over the crawl space. The firemen got the fire out thankfully, and nobody was physically hurt. This was one of the scariest nights of my life though. I will always remember the fire chief kneeling down to speak to me after he had talked to my parents, and he said, "Melinda, we believe it was arson." I looked at him with tears streaming down my face, and I say in anger, "Who is arson?" Everyone started laughing so hard, and I'm thinking, how is this funny? That damn arson could have killed my family. So he explained what arson was. I am still friends with the old fire chief's son, and I share that story with him often because his father passed away from cancer when we were teens. His father is the only happy memory I have from that horrific night. The island I grew up on had a city and a village out south. We lived out south, but before the village. We had firemen for out south, north, and the city. We had state troopers for the island and city cops in the city limits. My mum took my brother and I to our family friend's house. My dad dealt with the fire officials, and a state trooper showed up later. After the investigation, my family, neighbours, and firemen pieced together that a person had been living in our crawl space for at least 4 months. We know that he set the house on fire on purpose. He used a box of matches. My mum said the first odd thing she noticed that night was the smell of sulphur. And we also know who did it. It was Mark. His uncle was one of the firemen who first showed up at our house and saw him standing near our driveway watching. My mum told him my description of what the person was wearing that I saw fleeing from our house, and it was what he was wearing. Behind our house near the crawl space area, my dad found out where he hung out when he wasn't in the crawl space. There were a bunch of cigarette butts, cans of soda which were also found in the crawl space, but because our crawl space wasn't locked, our insurance company wouldn't pay for the repairs. Because of our water tanks, the space was supposed to be locked, so my parents never said anything to the police, and the firemen never said anything either. If we had told the truth, we wouldn't have a home today. It took 4 months for our house to be repaired, and it smelled like ozone even years later. But what bothers me the most is knowing that he had seen me and my friends undressed numerous times while changing in the rec room during tons of sleepovers. Where he had set up shop was right next to the plywood with the holes drilled through. He listened to all of our secrets. I never explained to my friends that he had seen us and heard us during our sleepovers, because I didn't want them to feel sick to their stomachs like I did, and still do. I still have issues when it comes to being home alone. I can't sleep if I'm the only adult in the house. I keep the volume on everything low. I'm scared to shower. I like to be able to see the front door. I have night terrors to this day, and I'm 34 now. I've been dealing with anxiety since the fire and panic attacks since I was 18. Just recently, I was diagnosed with PTSD. When the intruder was in his early 20s, he was caught for burning down a few houses and was put in jail. All of my childhood toys were stored in the crawl space, along with a lot of our family's sentimental possessions. I left A's house with more questions than I had come armed with, and, probably for the first time, I was left thinking that something was amiss. This caused me to go through a period of reflecting over the events of the compound, and afterwards to build up a picture of the unknowns. What did I miss? I began doing some research about Ouija boards to understand them and how they work. I mean, I had watched ghost TV shows, but they're just that, TV shows. I wished I hadn't have done the research as I realized the full extent and consequence of my encounter with Zozo. I feel shudders now just saying the name. After all, I read that the name gives the demon its power. While I went off in a tangent to find out all about Zozo and raise my fear levels exponentially in the process, it never really helped me achieve my goal of trying to link the events together, especially with how they relate to the compound. I tried figuring out what the words that Zozo told me could possibly mean. Radar, Richard, CRT, photos, understand. Now, I'm not going to tell you everything about Zozo, as you can find a plethora of information by doing a Google search. But one thing that I gathered was that Zozo is usually not the type to tell me words and just leave it at that. He was leading me on to something more. I hadn't experienced any paranormal experiences directly. Anything weird that I've experienced was all of my own doing. Mainly at my own obsession of trying to piece things together. If there was even something to piece together. Thinking back, 3 of the words were relatable to my experience at the base: radar, CRT, and photos. The base was a radar research center. I figured out as much from the documentation that was lying around, as well as the obvious radars frozen at the top of one of the big buildings. So Zozo was telling me a location. But that's not the only location. Zozo also mentioned CRT. Who explored a room with CRT monitors? A. Who took some weird box from the CRT room? A. Who has been acting odd since leaving the base? A. Who had a Ouija board with the aforementioned weird box sat next to it? A. The CRT word was probably the one that got me hooked, but the last word, photos, was the one that made an instant connection. The strange shadow in the photo with A. However, that was just one photo. Why did Zozo say photos, insinuating that there was more than one? A light bulb popped up in my head. I took 2 photos, but there was a third file which was corrupt. I immediately flashed open my laptop and connected up my camera to once again view the file contents. There were now 5 files. I felt my heart stop in that moment. I hadn't used my camera since that night, other than connecting to my laptop. The new files were a video and a text file. I was hesitant to immediately open the new file, so I first checked their properties, and was shocked when I looked when they were last modified. It matched the time I went to visit A. Now, I know my technology, and I certainly know that cameras only create and modify image files, and at no point do cameras, especially my one, create text files. I opened the text file and was simply stunned by what I read. I thought you might like your corrupt file back. You know where you need to go. It took me a few moments to build my composure back up. Several thoughts were swimming through my mind. Someone had been in my house. Someone had touched my camera. Coincidentally, the same time I was communicating with Zozo. I couldn't move. I was too scared to even blink or breathe. I didn't feel so lonely anymore and felt millions of eyes upon me. My house, my home, my sanctuary, my safe bubble away from the darkness and evils of outside had been punctured, and this paranoia, along with my obsession, had me hanging by fingertips over the dark hole of insanity. I had to take a second to stifle my curiosity about the corrupt file and the video. Once I took a look, I was committed to this insanity which I would likely never come back from. I was committed to this instinctual urge for answers and for closure. I looked outside my window while thinking. I don't know why, but I guess everybody looks out the window on a now overcast day for some outside perspective. I was in. I got a bit more comfortable in my chair and took a breath as I double-clicked on the video file. The video was shot using a night vision camera as it showed someone walking by a brick wall that was illuminated green. I could hear the unmistakable sound of the sea crashing against the shore. He's not where I think he is he? I see the cameraman slow down as he nears the end of the wall, peeks the camera around the corner and then shuffles around the corner. I see the cameraman shuffle around the following corner to see, to my shock, me. Whoever was holding the camera filmed me walk along the front of my big building and then continued to film as I lifted up myself and inside the building. After a few seconds, the cameraman turns away from the building and I don't see anything of interest for a minute or so until the cameraman hides around the corner and, once again, faces the camera in the direction of another person. This time it was A. I recognized the location. It was the little block of buildings that we all agreed A had to explore. From what I could see in the video, which was not much as the cameraman was positioned a bit of a distance away from A was oblivious, as I was, to being filmed. I watched as I noticed A try to open a door but found it padlocked. I noticed A's failed attempts at trying to get the door open, before I saw A bend down to pry open what looked like a vent to the bottom right next to the door. When A stood back up, I noticed he was holding a big sack. Before he opened the sack, I noticed A start to look around him, causing the cameraman to quickly slide the camera back behind the wall. A few seconds later, the camera re-emerged to show A rummaging through the sack. At this point, the cameraman had zoomed in, and I could see a bit clearer. A pulled out what looked like a crowbar, and I noticed him turn it over in his hands before he slowly looked up at the door. I saw him fit the crowbar in between the door to try and pry it open, to no luck. I then saw him try and attack the padlock. Again, with no luck. After his failed attempts, I could see him rummaging through the sack in frustration to then pull out a cylindrical object.
A fucking blowtorch?
I heard A exclaim. My eyes widened upon seeing this. I once again saw A slowly turn over the blowtorch in his hand, like he was trying to work out how to use it, before quickly pressing the handle to cause a bright white light pierce the darkness in front of him. This seemed to catch A off guard as I watched him jump at the loud hissing being emitted from this object. As A quickly released the handle on the blowtorch, I noticed him stand still like a statue, like he was listening out for movement around him. Once he was satisfied, I saw him proceed to activate the blowtorch against the padlock on the door. I watched as the padlock turned white as A used the crowbar to pry it apart. A had done it. He was in. I watched as he slowly sprung open the door, activated his flashlight and walked into the room. I could no longer see A. At this point, I was wanting the cameraman to follow A, as I was curious to see what was inside the room. The cameraman seemed to be stood there for ages, before I suddenly heard A gasp in shock.
What the fuck?
The cameraman rushed forward, but not before the video abruptly ended with static and the accompanying noise. I sat there in silence as I digested what I had just seen in the video. What did A see in that room? What was in that room that the cameraman didn't want A to see? Did A encounter the cameraman? Why didn't he tell us? I also had another thought regarding A and the blowtorch he found, but not before looking at the Corrupt No Longer file to confirm my suspicions. I fired open the file and cited what I saw. It was a black and white still photograph of A midway through cutting one of the 3 lines that we had seen on the metal blind in the kitchen of the compound. My suspicions were confirmed. Seeing this photo caused me to sit back abruptly in my chair and stare in a mix of disbelief and disgust. I also felt a little betrayed. Why did A do it? I must admit I was completely and utterly dumbfounded and was not sure how to proceed forward from this. I know that I now had a burning desire to 1. Find out what A saw inside the CRT room, and 2. Find out who had been filming us. Both thoughts were equally as creepy as each other, but I felt like the missing link to the puzzle could be found in the CRT room. As I said earlier, I was now committed to the cause of figuring out the loose ends from our exploration of the compound. I knew that opening these files and playing along with this game set up by the cameraman would be the only way that I could get closure, and, maybe, find a way to get the original A back. I had to get my shoes and coat on. It's this commitment which had led me to the very drastic action I needed to do. I reflected back on the video and photos I had seen, the strange shadow, the cameraman and A's strange behavior, as I walked along the shoreline, psyching myself up to enter the compound one last time. As I was about to get near to the entrance, my phone started ringing. It was A. I felt like I needed to start the conversation with him by telling him what I had seen in the video and in the photo, but the timing, it didn't feel right. I felt like I still needed some more evidence before potentially getting into another argument with him. This thought ended up being thrusted to the back of my mind, as the conversation with A would cause things to take an even more sinister turn. I swiped to answer the call.
C.
A started, rather hurriedly.
C, where are you? Are you somewhere safe?
Define safe, I replied, looking in front of me at the base. I was the opposite to safe, but what does safe even mean anymore? Why? What's up, pal?
Okay, I need you to listen to me and not question me at this time. Can you do that?
A told me, quite domineeringly. I felt that all too familiar sinister atmosphere surrounding me once more as I psyched myself up for what I was about to hear. Go right ahead, I replied, quickly.
So, I didn't tell you the exact story about my mum, but you have to hear me out. My mum was involved in an accident in her car, yes, but it wasn't because someone went through a red light. She was driving down a country lane when it seemed that she had swerved to avoid someone, and ended up flipping her car with her inside it. She ended up crushed between the roof and the top of her seat. And the thing is, man, the person who did it left a fucking note. And I think it's a person who's been following me for a while. I don't want to go into details right now, but things just haven't been right since that night. I feel like we've been disturbing something.
He said in quick sentences, barely pausing for breath. I felt super vulnerable now, but I pretended not to show it. Okay man, Keep calm. What did the note say? I wondered. I heard A choke up.
It said, you took from me. I take from you.
A's words, or rather the note's words, hit me like a fucking truck. I heard A begin to sob.
She's dead, man. He killed her. They killed her.
I fell silent for a few seconds. I'm so sorry, man. Those words were all I could muster. I shortly closed off the call, not long after that, amid some awkward, tense silence. I was crippled with fear, and what made it worse was that I was stood about a couple of 100 meters away from the source of all that fear, pain, and pure unfiltered horror. The text file on my camera ended with the line, "You know where you need to go." So there I was. I was in too deep, and I was entirely alone.